Yep.
And off he goes. It might get a little echoey. I'm sorry about that. I hope it doesn't. Okay. Too many moving parts here, you guys. Okay, so Greg can't be here with us today. He had a change in his work travel schedule, and yet he had a really good topic. And so Heather and I kind of debated back and forth a little bit, and I decided I'm just going to pitch in and have a conversation and see how it goes. And he finally sent me his slides. Did I tell you that? Okay, and they're okay, but my vision was a little bit different, and I'll share that with you in just a second. And I have this here for a reason. Um, yes, okay. So Greg's got 2 slides here, maybe 3. Okay, so summer programs was sort of his title. And I think of it as kind of a 3-legged stool that leads to one thing on top. And the 3-legged stool is summer camp, which we guys have already talked about at some point. I think we did a discussion on what summer camp's all about, all that kind of good stuff. Your unit doing high adventure type stuff. And that's what I really want to lean into today, because I have some experience and I know some of you folks do too. And then the third one would be the big high adventure bases, a la Philmont and Sea Base, Northern Tier, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to delve too deep into that. I mean, if we want to, we can. I don't have a ton of experience, although I'm glad John's here, because I was trying to remember what year you went to Philmont. Was it 17 or 15? That was way back. And that might come into play. And I know some of the other folks here have been to some of the high adventure bases. We can talk about that if you want to. This is really a discussion about these 3 things and kind of this summer season, right? And the big crux of this is retention. Because year over year, as your scouts get older and older, and they're like, oh yeah, we've done that 4-mile hike before. Oh yeah, we've done that car camping before. What keeps them in your program is the really cool stuff. The 50-mile backpack trip, the 4-day Maupin to Madras to Deschutes River float, right? And that's what this really comes down to. So the focus is, how do we keep the 14 and older crowd in your troop active, excited? Okay, so Greg breaks it down. I got some slides so you guys probably can't see it well. I'm sorry about that. I didn't bring my my big screen, and you're welcome for that. It's not death by PowerPoint today. Thank you. But I do have a few other slides for this middle point of, if your unit wants to go do something awesome. And Brian was emailing me about floating, about a raft trip, right? And we talked a little about that over email. We've got some stuff that is from a University of Scouting class that was taught by Tim Giorgi, and I'll share that with you in a bit. That's what I really want to lean into. How do we make our summer exciting so that when your scouts are at Camp Meriwether in November in the rain, they're like, oh yeah, that thing we're doing in July, it's going to be awesome. So he breaks summer program down into a couple different, this is Greg, buckets. Your first year scouts are their own beast, right? They get too far from the car, they get scared. Right? We've all seen this, and it's okay, right? That's where we start. They're coming out of the Cub Scout program. They may have never gone camping before. They may have, it's hard to know. And your second bucket is your second year scouts, all the way up to, roughly your star scouts, those that have done some of the things, but they're not really up there really quite yet. And then his other bucket, his overlap here, is 13 or 14 and older, plus those first class scouts, like first class and above, probably the ones that we're really targeting on making this an exciting thing. And one of the points he wants to make is that one event or one location does not fit everybody, right? And this comes into when you plan something, coming down to understand, what is my audience? What kind of maturity do they need to have to do this thing, right? If it's a kayak adventure, if it's a backpacking adventure, how much experience do they have in this thing? Do we need to have some technical knowledge going into this? Greg really wanted to go into summer camps. Where are you going? I think that's great, but everybody's going to camp, right? Camp, awesome. Have fun. I think of summer camp, this first pillar of this three-legged stool, as like out of the box. Hopefully it works. Hopefully the camp staff provides an amazing adventure for your scouts to go, right? Most of us, aside from advising our younger scouts on what to do, what merit badges to take or not, there's not a lot we can do to really facilitate our scouts having an amazing experience at summer camp. It's really up to the camp staff, my opinion. Does anybody disagree with that? I'd love to hear. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I think we have more engagement with some scouts. I know sometimes I wouldn't find out a scout was having that issue. There's nothing you can do about it.
Okay, and they break down on the way home and said it was a terrible week. Okay. Okay, so what I think you're saying is, as a scout master, an assistant scout master, an adult that's there, check in with your scouts through the week, see how they're doing, see if there are challenges.
Did they make it to their class?
Yeah, absolutely. Are they accomplishing what they set out to accomplish?
Right.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, good. Camp staff were here.
Our best to be best possible programs to our youth. But one thing that will derail our interactions with these kids is if their adult leaders are not as enthusiastic as we are. We need them engaged, we need them on our side. So
Yeah, and I see that with the Cub program a lot, right? Especially with Clark. And if you've got that mom or dad or grandma or whatever, that's grandpa, that's like, I'm just gonna nap all day, that makes it really hard. And our camp staff has almost perpetually been understaffed, right, for as long as I can remember. So that's a good point, that when you go to camp, have that enthusiasm, check in with your scouts, and get them out of the campsite and out into the camp doing stuff, right? Yeah.
If you can.
Yeah, there's always that one that just wants to sit in the cabin and do whatever. Okay, so beyond summer camp, I want to bring up, and I've shamelessly stolen / borrowed this from Tim Giorgi. Hopefully it'll come up here. Yeah, look at that. Cool. Oh, and for those online, I will share my screen. I'm trying real hard, guys. Okay, here we go. Cool, still there. Okay, so this is a fairly brief slide deck from a class called Local High Adventure. I can't see it. I've got all the chat stuff in the middle. And he starts by asking what everybody's doing at U of S, but this is the meat and potatoes, right? When you're talking about your unit putting together something that's truly awesome and it's for your scouts, let's define that. What is that local high adventure he's talking about? Not quite, let's get on an airplane and go to Florida. It's a little bit different. And then he's going to talk about the what, when, why, where, how, some requirements. And there's some really cool stuff in here about having it be, I think youth-led was where he's going with this, how you plan this, the timetable, and then he kind of transitions into high adventure bases like Philmont, like Swamp Base, Sea Base, Northern Tier, all that kind of stuff. So local. His definition of local, and I like this, because as you can see on this map, if you talk about a radius of, I'm gonna move things around so I can see here, of 6 hours of driving, will get you to Vancouver, Washington, we'll get you to Camp Easton in Idaho, and we'll get you to Northern California and everything in between, with the exception of a little carve out in Southeast Oregon where there's really nothing anyway, right? Sorry, Southeastern Oregon, I've been there. It's not much going on, right? So the point is, and those of you that have been to Easton have done this, right? You drive for an entire day and you go to camp, and then you drive for an entire day back, or you stop at the Six Flags, right? Did you go to Easton? I forget. Yeah, same thing. Kind of like that, but it's just your troop doing something amazing. Usually a week long, maybe 5 days, right? There's always that buffer of it's going to take a day to get there, it's going to take a day to get back. That's a lot. No one wants to get home at 2 a.m, right? There's a lot of high adventure experience. Okay, so let's throw out some ideas. I've already given you one reason. You can say that if you want to, but why would we add a high adventure trip like this to our troop program?
14-year-old, yeah.
Right? That retention, that's a big one. That's like number one. If you're online, feel free to add to the chat. I'm watching. Anybody else? There are other reasons. There are other good reasons.
Also keep your kids, more involved in the summer because people tend to bail out, in the summertime and do trips and stuff. You already have kind of a bigger trip planned months in advance, then people can plan around that.
Yes.
So stick around.
And we're going to get to that too. The planning aspect of if you don't say, let's go to, Vancouver next month, let's do it next summer and have that. So your family's put on the calendar. That's a big thing. Joe. Yes. Okay. They probably can't hear you. So Joe Istook says it gives your younger scouts something to look forward to. I have a great example of that. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd be terrible to say that I enjoy doing this.
No, that's not terrible at all. We want to have fun too. Yes. People talk about it and it's great recruitment.
Yeah.
Yes. You can put this on your calendar, go to Weeble's Woods and say, hey, look, we're going rafting next summer. We'd love for you to join us. Having that 12-month calendar, I say this to Cub Scouts, I say this to you guys. 12-month calendar sells scouting. Anybody disagree with me? I'll fight you over it.
You can do crew light.
Sorry, go
You
ahead.
can have a crew, but not have a crew. You can do all the high adventure stuff that a crew would do.
Yes.
But not call them, not have to have a.
Or you can also have a crew on the side. And if you're going to go do something where somebody turns 18 and they want to come along, okay, we'll do this as a crew. You can multiple across. So you can do all kinds of things like that. But yeah, you're right. And in my day, anybody else in the mid to late 90s, Adventure Patrol? Did you have one? I can't remember, Pete, your troop doing that. We did that to keep the older scouts engaged. We called it Adventure Patrol. And then that was when the current adventuring program is called Exploring, I think. Trying to remember. It's been a long time. Okay, anybody else? Other reasons why you would add these big ticket items to your program?
I guess one thing I thought of is it could be, and I kind of did this with my troop, we have a lot of younger kids. And none of them really have a ton of experience like canoeing, kayaking.
Yeah.
And I decided, hey, let's try and do an overnight canoe trip on Willamette, which is really close, a lot of fun. And I suggested to all of my scouts, like, hey, if you don't have canoeing or kayaking, please, try and fit that in at summer camp if you can.
Oh.
And sort of, the like, hey, get the skills at camp, and then we'll probably do like an outing, on a weeknight or a weekend at Hag Lake or something. And then we'll, in August, go out and do a bigger, float trip for a couple nights.
So you're springboarding off of some interesting stuff that they learned at summer camp.
Yeah.
And you're landing with a little shakedown, Hag Lake or something like that, or whatever. You could do this with backpacking, canoeing, kayaking, all that. And then boom, there's a big adventure. Go ahead.
I was gonna say on that same idea, it's basically gives you a theme for the summer. Or
Yes, a theme. This summer's theme is water. Next summer's theme is the Pacific Crest Trail. Themes are awesome. That's not even on his list. Okay, here's the list. Retention is number one. And that's, this is my hallmark for this conversation. Absolutely retention, right? Keep those scouts interested, keep the younger scouts thinking what's next. Advancement. Who's interested in the backpacking merit badge? Who is interested in this kayaking now, right? And canoeing and all those things, hiking merit badge. We'll talk about leadership opportunities in a second. This is a great way to say, okay, John's son, Sam, really wants to go on a 50-mile backpack. Let's make him the scout in charge. Where do you want to go? Lead the conversation. And then we have another adult who's not Mr. Rig, who is helping him because, as we all know, our kids don't listen to us as much as they do to somebody else. This is a great opportunity for leadership and growth, right? And Pete mentioned personal growth with learning things like paddling, learning how to pack your backpack in such a way, learning how to throw a bear bag. Some of our scouts have never done that, right? And we can talk about it and we can practice it all we want, but we get out there 25 miles into the PCT. Where are the trees? Where do we put the bear bag, right? Practicing on the site is like golden. And then team building. And I know some of you have been to Philmont or Seabase, and you've taken 12 beating hearts at most, right? 12, I think, is the max. That is the ultimate team building exercise. right? You rely on each other. You know, who brought the Dutch oven, right? Uh, so these are some of the things that Tim Giorgi really leans into. The what? We talked about a few of these things. There's a couple others that we haven't hit on. We talked about some water adventures. Backpacking is great. Anybody have any other ideas for cycling? Yes. Talk to me about cycling. How would you do that?
We did it, just do it as supported rather than
Mhm.
bike packing.
Okay.
Logistics worked out a lot better.
Mhm.
I remember having done that as a youth and having loved it. So
Yeah.
We did a 4-day trip out to Sweden.
Oh, cool. So you're bicycling, that was a road bike, right? Yeah. So you could do bike packing, you could do supported, and supported you have like a van or a truck or all of the above, kind of tail, make sure everybody's safe. So I did that as a youth. I grew up in Corvallis and we did all the way to Sweet Home and back and something else, Brownsville, 4 days. And my goodness, my quads were blown by the end of that. It was nuts. So cycling, there's also, you could do a mountain biking thing. There are mountain biking trails you could do an adventure with. Coast Range, Pete, I know you're a mountain biking guy
Yeah.
back in the day.
Coast Range, there's actually there's a new hiking trail that goes from Corvallis to the sea. That I've heard is a little brutal just because of,
So does that come out of Newport?
no, yeah, I think it does.
Okay, that makes sense.
McPherson did it like
Oh,
last
okay.
year, and so he's definitely the person.
I feel like there was a thing that they took some tunnels and like did a tunnel redo
They're
thing, like
working on a Salmonberry Trail
yes.
here, and that is not open yet, but
Yeah.
there's a Corvallis to the Sea Trail, which I think Jason was saying that
Yeah.
he would really recommend like first class and above.
Right.
Everyone else survived it. It's not like an official trail as far as, like it's a single track, right? But it's well, it has good directions. And
It's maintained, right?
It's kind of maintained, yes. I mean, it sort of uses existing roads and tracks.
Yeah. Okay, so those are pretty good. And that kind of rounds out the list that Tim has here, the rafting, canoeing, mountain biking, road cycling is what I call cycling. And then traditional back. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
On the biking.
Yeah.
Up in Oak Ridge, it's about 3 hours from here.
Yeah.
But they have a really nice 2-story bike facility that can run you up and down trails.
Ooh.
There's hundreds of miles of trails around Waldo, you can ride there.
Yeah, up on 58, right? Up and down Highway 58. So Brian's talking about outside Oak Ridge for those online, if you can't hear him. There's some is it a double-decker bike thing?
No, there's a 2-story
Story.
big bike shop. where
Oh, a
you-
shop.
You can rent bikes, you can buy bikes. you can
Cool.
repair bikes.
Okay, awesome.
A ton to do up there.
So that's a
Like
great place
shuttle.
to like start and then do a thing.
Yeah, you pay a fee and then you put your bike in the trailer, they run you up the top. of the
Oh,
hill, you
neat.
Ride down, and all kinds of.
That sounds like the volcano in Hawaii. Pay a van to take you to the top so you can coast down. Okay, if you're online, feel free to put questions or comments in the chat. I'm watching. You got rafting in there. Kayaking, sea kayaking. Ooh, from Travis. That's a neat idea. I'd have never thought of that. Yeah. So I mean, in kayaking. So I'll give you an example. I'll actually give you a couple. So I mentioned my troop every year in August when I was growing up did a 4-day Deschutes River raft trip from Maupin to Madras. That's south to north, right? Yeah. Thank you. It was the highlight of our summer. Like summer camp, you passed your swim test, boom, you could go on the raft trip. Kara Kirtland, Troop 554, took her, like the entire troop, I think, up to outside of Vancouver, BC, and did a 4-leg canoe portage lake thing. And I don't remember where it was. Thank you. Was that it? Are you okay? She broke her foot halfway through it and finished. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, so that's again a little bit outside of that like 6-hour drive range, but if you're willing to do that 1 extra hour to get there, that's so cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Wasn't with Scouts, it was another youth group, but went up to Ross Lake in North Cascades, and you can rent canoes right on the lake, and it's 20 miles straight north all the way to the Canadian border.
So Ross Lake, starting in Washington, I assume?
It's in Washington, right on.
Nice.
You got a hike down in, but then it's about 20-25 mile lake. We got a 50-miler canoe trip.
Oh, nice.
Just
Yeah.
canoeing up the lake and back. You look one backcountry campsite to another along the lake.
Very cool. Now, I've never done it, but I could see, let's hike 50 miles of the PCT and end at the Bridge of the Gods,
Did that.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, the logistics of getting there and back again, you need a ride or two, but pretty well marked. Yeah, there you go. There's your 50 miler. Yeah, I hear it's kind of hard. It's not always perfectly well marked. Okay, so trip requirements I want to get into. What level is kind of the first question? What age range? Ultimately, you, the adults that are leading this, need to be the ones to decide whether a scout is mature enough to go. Mature enough in terms of physical strength. You know, if you're strapping on a pack for a long trek, are they going to be able to do this? The ability to paddle if you're going on a kayaking adventure. So my troop with the Deschutes River thing, their requirement was you had to earn the swimming merit badge to go. Period. It wasn't swim test, it was swimming merit badge. And I tell you what, that motivated those scouts that first year to get that merit badge because that was a thing. And Brian and I talked a little bit about whitewater rafting, and there are other, like, you know, for us as adults getting thank you, safety afloat. And I suggested, you know, the kids are going to be in the water if you're rafting. You may as well do safe swim defense. Why not? Just so you understand it. Having somebody who's somewhat of an expert in whether you're in the rafting, the river, or you're going to hire somebody who's a river guide, all that stuff comes into play, right?
Are you able to share the slides afterwards?
I can actually, yes. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I was just gonna ask, if I think about other people's experiences, the topic we're studying actively in our treatment. In the past, we have always had, for all our high adventures, there's a series of training events, and if you
Yes.
successfully complete all the training events, then you can go on the high adventure.
Yeah.
However, sometimes that means that there may have, you know, grit in the moment.
Okay.
But not necessarily stamina for a longer, bigger, harder event.
Okay.
And we were considering adding the requirement to have first class, which basically you have a little more.
Right. You're maybe a little older, a little bit more experienced.
Yeah.
So
Other people thought.
let me reiterate the statement to anybody who can't hear, unless you can hear Joe online. Last month, I was told people could hear in the Cub breakout. Basically, Joe's statement is, the shorter shakeout hikes, boating, whatever, sometimes the scouts do okay on those, but then it gets to something longer and they start to fizzle. Is that a good summary? Anybody have any follow-up on that? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, that, you say that, it reminded me of the parent film on. That, there was a scout. I don't know if he was first class, he might have been, but he was the same age as everybody else. But just the maturity, I think where it came out. There was a time that we didn't try a second shoot. No, I'll be fine. So just kind of that awareness, like there are consequences to my choices.
Right.
In, you know, whether it's personal hygiene or keeping your shoes tied. We had like the exact same deal that they were gonna have at Philmont as close as we can get it, and then it's kind of like that is all like package stuff. I don't know, I'm just not gonna eat it.
Oh, wow.
Like, well, again, that's sort of the consequences.
Yeah.
You know, and I had to talk him through it, and he eventually ate it, but it was, you know, that was his first response. And then the third was just we expected people to not just show up at the hikes, but like, hey, you need to be doing training, you know, go out on walking and stuff. And our dad was saying, well, I tried to, but he just wasn't interested in it. And he ended up not going, kind of self-selecting himself out, which, you know, great friends with my son, would have been fun to have him go, but he would not have made it. And so I think it's just looking for some of those things, like what are they doing with their shoes, with their craft, are they motivated? You know, that fall he started cross country and drug his dad out running all sorts of times. So it's like that maturity happens. There's something about that 14 that things before that.
I saw a hand. Brian, did you have a comment?
I'm saying previously we used to be 14 first class.
Yeah.
And a minimum first class, because then they have some skin in the game and they have some skills.
Yeah, there is definitely a maturity thing when they hit 14 for a lot of them, it seems like, right? And yeah.
I guess 12.
Well, maybe you just need to go on a longer checkout. Yeah.
The shakedown.
Just as an example, I didn't go on the whole trip, but there was a scout who I'm trying to think if he was second, I think he was working on second class. I think he was in that 14-year age range. You know, he wasn't probably the most mature. He wanted to go to Philmont, and that was sort of part of their pre-hike, right? And he just collapsed on the first day and just basically had to be drugged through the rest of the trip and just kind of hung out in his tent whenever everybody else kind of like they did some more day hikes. So like he didn't wind up going to Philmont. It was good again. He kind of self-selected, but you know, that was a pretty serious hike, right? At, you know, 7,000 feet, right? So, I mean, you know, you could go on a longer hike, you know, with multiple days before you set out on a higher adventure trip like that, rather than just a weekend. And maybe that'll sort of, again, kind of select some of those. Because I mean, you know, if they could hang for 4 days, high elevation, I mean, you know, it's probably going to tell you a lot about how to do on multiple days.
That did come up with us. And then they had to do the same thing we'd have. Events you'd have to do, and they all the way requirements and still you have to go, and then sure, you can go. But if you didn't make those requirements, you couldn't hike as far. Anyways,
Then it should be the same thing with the adult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We told the adult in the Belmont couple years ago that he didn't go. He didn't show up for any practice, didn't really take it seriously. He gave it that. I've done the PCT multiple times. Great. Have you done Philmont? So that was a thing. That's even harder. That's a harder discussion, but adult, can't go.
Well, because a lot of the, for something like Philmont or Snoop Bays, or a lot of things that we, you know,
Yeah.
it really makes or breaks the trip. And so if we have somebody that's better than the part of it,
Yeah.
that. Just starting for almost not even.
And I had the same question because again, back when I was a youth in the Deschutes River trip and as a youth, you had to earn the swimming merit badge. I don't know if they had an equivalent for the adult, right? I have no idea. I was gonna ask my dad and I completely forgot. But this is important to remember that it's not just testing the youth, but testing your adults or yeah.
We've done a couple of high adventures now. I know we looked hard at, do we do an age limit? Do we do a rank limit?
Yeah.
I ended up not instituting any hard limits of that sort, and we're all saying kind of the same thing. But I ended up taking the Scoutmaster program.
Yeah.
As in, if you convince me on the practice hike and or be the right age and rank and or et cetera, so that I'm sure, but eventually it's the same skills like we're all talking about. I just made it the explicit requirement was convince me you can do it.
So did you have any challenges with talking to an adult? I'm sorry, Tommy Tenderfoot can't go because
I actually did not.
Okay. Because that's going to be a hard conversation.
As you guys have talked about, most people will end up self-selecting themselves out right before that point. There were a couple of fairly, I wouldn't even call them pointed discussions, but they were frank discussions.
Do you really want to
It
go to
was,
this?
yeah, it's kind of like you said 2 months ago that you really want to go.
Yeah.
Now that you've gone on some of these practice hikes or bike rides or whatever, what are you thinking?
Right.
And every single one of them, thankfully, has come back around to, yeah, okay, right. And they still want it, but they understand that it's aspirational and that it's not risky. And so thankfully, I haven't had that really hard moment yet, but most of the time, like I said, all that needs, in my experience, has been, another decently hard practice trip, but all of a sudden,
Right.
yeah, I think we all agree.
Right. I'm gonna grab the microphone here real quick. I'm gonna leave that.
One other carry on or follow on thought to that
Good.
we kind of alluded to too, is that the practice trip is the high adventure for the younger guy.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And
Your shakedown
we've
being,
done
yeah, the
We've
thing.
done a 6-day backpacking trip, a 6-day canoe trip. Last year we did a 4-day cycling trip. The last 3 years now, and every single time we've had a 3-day trip in advance of that, a 3-day backpacking trip, a 3-day canoe trip, point to point to point, and a 3-day cycling trip where we did 15+ mile cycle ride each day.
Right.
And that was the high adventure for the majority of the troop. The guys that aren't going on the longer one, they had to be there to prove their chops.
Right.
The guys that aren't going on the big high adventure, that was their big experience.
So this is kind of almost like a tiered adventure experience where, okay, if you're working towards tenderfoot, we'll do this. And then if you're working towards first class, you do the next two things. But you could if you wanted to, right? Yeah, it just kind of became that. What it is I wanted to call out in terms of if you're going to go, and I know that if you go to Philmont or Northern Tier, as it turns out, Jamboree this year, one of the important things to have above and beyond something like safety afloat, or if you're going on a rafting trip or canoeing BSA lifeguard, it's kind of important. Wilderness first aid. Mark and Cinder Hilliard put on an excellent wilderness first aid show. If you need that and you want to go do something, you're not familiar with that whole thing, let me know. I've got their contact. They're awesome humans, and they put on a great program for that. The other thing that Tim has here, and yes, I'll try to remember to share these slides later. This is from U of S 2019. Number of adults going. The absolute minimum is 2. Recommendation minimum is 3, because what happens if something, right? And we never want to have that happen, but what if, right? And you don't want to necessarily have to cut off your trip. If somebody gets sick and has to go home. So you're saying 4?
4, because
right.
Still need the two on one leadership.
Right. Okay. So what if a youth
So
needs to go?
You gotta then pull, if you're 3.
Yep.
Gotta pull a youth off, and then you've gotta then pull a youth off.
That's a great point.
So if you do 4 adults, you get a second adult to just say, sorry, it's not about us.
Right.
And the 2 adults pull the youth off.
So that's also worth considering depending on the size of your program, how many youth you think you might want to go. If you've got a big troop and you're going to carve out a certain percentage to go do a 50-miler, how many adults can we have this? Okay. There's another thing here, and he doesn't have a lot of notes on this, but the recommendation, this is part of being scout-led, part of being a leadership opportunity, is to have a crew leader, to elect at the very first planning meeting as the very first thing, a crew leader. And I'm going to go ahead and say, I think you should have a scout in charge and an adult in charge. And I know some of our troops do that. My troop does that. And that gives the youth agencies. Anybody else do that on a regular basis? 592 does? Awesome. I know 162 does usually. And then have the crew lay out the meetings they need leading up to that program and start to map out where our shakeouts going to be. How often do we want to sit down and discuss? And at one point, we need to nail down where are we going? And probably the first thing is the calendar spread, right? Get that locked in. To plan the trip, start early. His recommendation is, I would say maybe a little bit more, but fall before that. So if I'm going to plan something for summer of 2024, I want to get my crew together September this year and start talking about where we're going to go, when we're going to do it, who's going to go, how much is it going to cost, we need to fundraise for this, all that kind of stuff. Scouts eligible should be promoting their own ideas, scout-led, right? Define your trip dates, make this a regular time each year. And this goes back to, I was talking about a little bit with my troop. We always did our Deschutes trip in late August, like August 20 something. It was just on the calendar every year. I would submit, I think a better program is rotating. We're going to do a rafting trip this year. We're going to do backpacking next year. We're going to do kayaking or whatever the year after. I know this goes back to when I worked with Chris May for Cub Scout Breakout. He did Pinewood Derby one year, he did Space Derby the next year, and he did Rain Gutter Regatta the third year. I like that idea of keeping it interesting, keeping it fresh. And then it's not the same thing every time. Because the second time I went down the Willamette, not the Willamette, sorry, the Deschutes, this is the same dang river. And I'm not a water dude, really. It's not my thing. First time was amazing. Second time was this again. Where are the hot springs? My opinion. Thanks. I'm making Mary chuckle there, I think. Define your trip dates, regular time, skills training. We talked about this a little bit. Shakeout trips, do they have the mechanical capabilities of doing that? Okay, so that's Tim's slides. Go ahead, Jordan.
One more overlay, I think I've heard from national unit commissioners.
Mhm.
To get the safety.
Yeah.
Ideas as part of every meeting, certainly the safety. Program for high adventure. What kind of training is needed to be a successful snow shelter maker?
Yeah.
What do you need to do? What tools, what personal skill set do you have to have, so that safety overlay needs to be put into all of this.
Well, in a similar note, like if you're going on a big bike trip, what kind of safety factors are there? Is there, remember coming back from our trip to Sweet Home, there was a really, really big downhill coming, I think, north out of Sweet Home. And somebody in the adult leadership stopped us and said, guys, you got to use your brakes because I don't want to use sheets to bandage you up on the way to the hospital if you spill.
Was that the hill that I hit 54.5 miles an hour?
Might be, actually. I don't know if it's out of Sweet Home.
Yeah.
And it was wild. I mean, going into it as a scout, you don't realize there's this thing.
It's like Lori recommended.
Going up the other side must be nuts. Going up where we went down. But I mean, that's a good example too. Go ahead, John.
You're talking about, and you mentioned wilderness first aid. One thing we did with our Vermont trip, one of our scout leaders actually got trained to certify for wilderness first aid,
Oh, wow.
and then Amy did that. And
That's
then
awesome.
offered it to everyone on the crew, so not just the adults. Everyone had to, there was scheduling conflicts, and not everybody finished their wilderness first aid, but most of the, both adult and scout.
Yeah, we had everybody CPR qualified on our.
There's a subset training for protection of women and girls along with wilderness high adventure experience. Modified to help everybody.
So the idea is to have that early in our minds when we're planning this of what training do we need, youth training, adult training, both, right? Okay, so the last thing, and Greg has a lot of things on here in terms of like, yeah, the OA, NOAC is great, and Service Corps, Aero Corps, that kind of stuff. I put them in a little bit different bucket, as well as there's one other thing. Oh, Jamboree. It's outside of your unit, right? It's a separate function. If it's a chapter, if it's a lodge, if it's your Jambo troop, something like that. Yes, your scouts are going to come back, I hope, super excited about scouting, doing the next thing, and wearing awesome patches and whatever it is, right? Have them do that if they're into it, absolutely. But I want to focus on our individual units. And the last thing would be, for me, that third foot of the stool is the high adventure, the Philmonts, the Sea Base, the Northern Tier. Who has been? Ron, we've been, we've got a few.
Sort of.
So you sort of go, Pete.
So
I put a toe in Arizona.
So Northern Tier is not really, I mean, it's not like a camp, right? It's basically, you show up and do a trip. Well, as a private citizen, I did a trip in the Boundary Waters.
Oh, cool.
Which, is totally doable. I mean, you have to figure out how to rent the canoes. You have to put in a permit, like, I want to say in like Thanksgiving the year before, the summer you go. So it's possible to go do that same adventure, take your own stuff, and it's probably cheaper. It would be sort of all under the guise of your unit, right? You wouldn't have a guide with you, but I mean, it's totally doable. And it's amazing. I mean, it's an awesome place to go because it's like backpacking with canoes, and yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, yeah. And don't rent aluminum canoes. That's my
You just never know where it's been. You had to kind of where you been. Philmont. Awesome. So this is the thing that I learned about Philmont, and I think Sea Base is there's a lottery system. And my understanding is you put it up for when you want to go. You mark the date, you say, I'll put it in, you either get it or don't. And we won for no. What is the story behind our scouts going?
Well, I've gone to both Philmont and Sea Base, and persistence is key. We misread the information and we're like well over a month past when the lottery was supposed to be. And so as soon as we realized that, it scrambled, I called them. She's like, great, we'll put you on the list. You are 410th on the waiting list. Wow. We're not gonna happen here. And a few months passed and she gives me a call and said, I've got like 3 dates for you. Which one am I the date?
I think part of that was you guys went during spring break.
No, that was not so much.
Oh,
That
oh,
was
so
ski
much.
base.
Sorry, that was
Ski
ski base.
base, we did. We learned our lesson and then read all the dates correctly. We don't. But we didn't get in the lottery. But here's where having a scout that just has a passion for it, and both of those trips, there was one scout that was very passionate about, like, I'm gonna make this happen. So when we didn't make a lot of sea base, he just scoured the website and tried to figure out how to find out there. There's also that have trips over spring break that were still open. So just, yeah, having a scout that really owns it.
Yeah.
Makes all the difference.
I go back to the cooler idea of somebody's gonna go.
So we were similar to you, we did go on, you applied like a year and a half before the summer, so we even applied, we went summer of 2021 and applied in 2019. And we were like 1,140 on. We took 3 dates, we were waitlisted like forever, I'm like, okay, we're not gonna go. A week later, they're like, hey, you're good, here's your date, get your first date. How'd that work out? So the wait list is a lie. It's there, but it's the wait list for the entire summer. So then they go back and they look at, okay, what are your dates? Okay, we were second for our primary date.
Oh,
The
wow.
first 2 crews jumped from 7-day to 12-day, we flew right in, so that part was easy.
Oh, wow.
But there's also, if you go for Philmont, if you go on the Philmont website, throughout the year or throughout the summer, there's open availability.
Mhm.
Usually later in the summer, so if you guys decide, now, you could literally say, hey, let's go to Philmont next
Something
summer.
like
Probably
August,
find a
when it's
date
gonna be open.
August, yeah, because people start going back to school, they know it's gonna be warmer.
Right.
And so it's possible to not make the initial thing, and still go.
Anybody else want to? Go ahead.
That's how we went to the base. You're just like, yeah, let's see if there's anything next summer. And we go on there like, there's some openings.
Yeah.
And it's after, the one scout who wanted to wait till after her birthday. It's the week after her birthday, let's go.
You just
After
the right
the-
age. Yeah.
Well, and what I've observed from this district is we have 4 troops that have crews that are attached. And what I've noticed is every single one of those crews has either 5 or 6 primary youth members. And they tend to expand when they go somewhere exciting and then contract when there's, during the off season, which I think is actually a really great way to use a crew to attach it to your trooper picking packet. And you multiple across, so the scouts that are, 16, 17, they can be in both, still learn Eagle, still do the awesome things. You can still bring the 18 and 19-year-olds that aged out, but they're still like jonesing to go somewhere awesome, right? I've seen it work. I saw that with the sea-based trip. I had a couple that went that were 18, wasn't it? I swear there was a couple.
Yeah.
At least one.
Yes.
I thought it was a really good way to keep the older scouts engaged a little bit. Keep them in, keep them around, and then offer them an assistant scoutmaster patch. Why not, right? So anybody else a high adventure based story to tell? Well, again, I think these are 3 parts of a structure that helps maintain an amazing program. Keeping your older scouts excited, having your younger scouts something to look forward to. And again, the shoulder seasons and the winter, hopefully everyone still camps, but it's one of those things of not quite as exciting when you're floating down the river. It's 90 degrees outside. It's amazing. There's not a cloud in the sky, and the memories are being made every moment, right? So, that's it. That's what I got. I hope that was helpful, interesting. Ooh, I got something from online. Oh, people dropping because they got to go. Okay. Not a lot of structure today, but thank you for being here. I am gonna stop the recording and then you guys can say all the weird things that you want to. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and we will be, I'm going to have my mouse. We'll be off to the races. And that's probably the shortest roundtable breakout I've ever done.
Are there